Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Mikhail Bulgakov's play, The Days of the Turbins. So I'm reading this out of Classic Soviet Plays. And this is an interesting classic Soviet play because it's pretty un-Soviet in many ways. So what I mean by that is that fairly early on in the history of the Soviet Union, the government mandated socialist realism. Socialist realism is a form of realism, which basically means that the art needs to present things believably, naturalistically. Fantasy is outside the realm of realism. Highly stylized farce would not count, right? So it needs to be mimetic, is the sort of Aristotelian term, right? That it needs to reflect things that actually exist and can happen in the real world. That's the realism component. The socialist realism element of socialist realism has to do with the type of content that is the focus of the art, right? And so it is going to have a socialist bent. It is typically going to focus on proletarian characters, workers or peasants. It is going to sort of tell heroic stories about their great deeds in service of communism, etc., etc. Right? It's an aesthetic system that is propagandistic and meant to be truthful, which seems contradictory, but there you go. The Days of the Turbins is very much not socialist realism. It's a realist play, right? Everything that happens is based in sort of the world that not we inhabit, but the people of 1918 in Ukraine inhabited. Specifically, the military aristocratic class, because the Turbins and their associates. So we have Alexei Vasilyevich Turbin, Nikolai Vasilyevich Turbin. These are two brothers. Alexei is a colonel of artillery. He's 30. Nikolai is 18. He's a military cadet. Their sister, Elena Vasilyevna Talberg, who had obviously been a Turbin. She is now married to Vladimir Robertovich Talberg, who is a colonel of the general staff and an assistant to the hetman of all Ukraine. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. The other characters, Mishlevsky, Shervinsky, Stredzinski, are all officers in the military. And this is, to be clear, this is the... Okay, so I said to be clear. I am not 100% clear on this because this is an extremely confusing period of history where things change very rapidly, right? So most of this takes place in 1918 in Ukraine, where a government that, according to Wikipedia, is called the Ukrainian state, I think, is sort of sandwiched between a quasi-nationalist, socialist republic of Ukraine and another quasi-nationalist, socialist republic of Ukraine that then gets absorbed into the Soviet Union and becomes a Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine, which it remains, I think, basically until 1989-ish, whenever it is that Ukraine splits off from the Soviet Union with the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. So they're in a very sort of narrow transitory period here, but basically they are more or less in the Ukrainian army in the service of the white cause, right? So during the Russian Civil War, the Bolsheviks were the Reds, the Tsarists were the Whites, there was the Blacks who were the anarchists, and the Greens who were sort of localized anti-authoritarian peasants of various strands and various sort of degrees of centralization. So the Turbins and their circle are aristocratic. They are white supporters of the Tsar, the sort of traditional Russian monarchic and aristocratic social order. And this is striking because it is very much not a socialist realist subject matter, right? Like normally, and the thing is, normally if you were staging a play or creating any work of art rooted in socialist realism and you had aristocratic characters or white characters, they would need to be villains. And some of them are, right? Some of them are real scumbags, right? Like Vladimir Robertovich Talberg, Elena's husband, he's a coward. He's basically he abandons his wife to go and hide out with the Germans. And this is another sort of weird bit of this that I'm not 100% clear on, right? Because so you've got the hetman of all Ukraine, who is the sort of king of Ukraine, basically, more or less, right? He's referred to in this play, or at least in this translation, is referred to as a monarchy, whereas the Tsar of Russia is referred to with an imperial title. So the hetman of all Ukraine, who runs the Ukrainian state, right? I'm going to use the term that Wikipedia uses. And again, this is a sort of monarchical, conservative type society. It is not very popular. There is a guy named Petliura, something like that. And he is a sort of Ukrainian nationalist, quasi-socialist, but he's not aligned with the Bolsheviks. So he is basically trying to topple the hetman's government, and the Turbins, Mishlevsky, Shavinsky, Studinsky, these people are all in the army fighting against Petliura, and potentially fighting the Bolsheviks if the Bolsheviks show up. For most of the play, Petliura is the main sort of threat. However, the Ukrainian state is apparently allied with Germany, which is kind of an unfortunate alliance because it's 1918, and if you know anything about the year 1918, you'll know that things were not going swimmingly for the Germans, right? It was late in World War I. The Entente powers, Britain, France, it had been Russia, but then Russia dropped out of the war and the U.S. joined the war, and their sort of allies, Britain, France, the U.S., basically by this point are the sort of central members of the Entente. They are driving the Axis powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans back, basically, right? Germany is on the verge of defeat. So Germany withdraws its troops from Ukraine, no longer providing support to the hetman's government. The hetman then flees, basically sort of goes to Berlin, basically sort of leaving the Ukrainian army the White Ukrainian army to its fate. And of course, the Turbins and Mishlevsky and their associates are all very worried about this, right? And they're worried that Petliura is going to come and he's going to basically sort of execute them for being officers in the hetman's army. The way in which this becomes a Soviet play, as opposed to a Russian play or a White Russian play, is that the characters who are maybe most admirable or relatable come to recognize the error of their ways. And this is sort of a contentious bit because it's not 100%. But Alexei Turbin is the main one. And he's a very sort of noble, honorable officer. He's a military guy. He's a regular army guy. And he's one of the very few characters in the play who is presented as kind of not really having any major disfiguring character traits. So Alexei is a very generally positive person. But upon learning and having it confirmed, having gone to the hetman's palace and finding him gone, finding the general staff has abandoned the place, Alexei returns to his command, which is made up of a mix of sort of regular army and cadets. And he basically says to them, I order you to disband and to go home because the hetman has abandoned us. The cause that we believe in no longer exists. Those who we would be fighting for have not regarded it as worth fighting for or standing up for us. So what he says to them, he basically, again, orders his soldiers and officers to take off their uniforms, remove their insignia, and to go home, to basically sort of merge back into the population and attempt to navigate this new reality. And Studzinski, who's one of his sort of subordinate officers, says, Alexei Vasilyevich, he's quite right. This is about a cadet who wants to sort of go to the Don River, and rejoin the White forces and continue to fight. So Studzinski says, Alexei Vasilyevich, he's quite right. We had better leave everything and pull the battalion out to the Don. Alexei says, Captain Studzinski, you will do nothing of the kind. I am in command of the battalion. I will give the orders and you will obey them. To the Don, listen, all of you. On the Don you will find the same as you have here, if you ever get that far. You will find the same kind of generals and the same pack of scoundrels at headquarters. Nikolka says, the same headquarters swine. That's Alexei's brother, who's also in this unit. Alexei says, quite right. They will make you fight your own people, and when the people crack your heads for you, they will run away abroad. I know the situation in Rostov is the same as in Kiev. Batteries without shells, cadets without boots, and officers sitting in the coffee houses. Listen to me, my friends. I am an officer of the line, and I have been told to make you fight. It would be different if there was something to fight for, but there isn't. I declare for all to hear that I will neither lead you nor allow you to go. I tell you the white movement in the Ukraine is finished. It's finished in Rostov-on-Don. It's finished everywhere. The people are not with us. They are against us. This is the end, and it's a dead end. So I, regular officer Alexei Turbin, who went through the war against the Germans as Captain Studzinski and Mishlevsky will testify, take the whole responsibility, take everything on my own conscience. warn you, and loving you as I do, send you home. That is all I have to say. Tear off your epaulets, drop your rifles, and go home at once. And so Alexei Turbin, who is, again, pretty close to an admirable character, he basically declares the death of the White Movement, right? The death of the military campaign to restore Tsarist Russia. And this, of course, is a significant thing, right, within the play, right? Because you have this admirable character who is on the other side, but who acknowledges that the communists have won, basically. It's not quite that, because you have the whole sort of issue with Pevyora versus the Bolsheviks, but by the end of the play, the Bolsheviks have arrived in Ukraine, so the Russian communists have arrived to conquer Ukraine. Problematic from the perspective of the 2020s, where once again, Russia is attempting to imperially conquer Ukraine. But in the Russian Civil War, the Russian army, the Red Army, does conquer Ukraine and bring it in as the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The various members of sort of the Turbin circle, because Alexei gets killed. He dies basically shortly after he disbands this unit, and there is a sort of heroic quality to his death. Like, he has, as the editors of this put it, he cannot outlive his ideals, basically, the death of his ideals. His brother Nikolka gets grievously wounded, but a lot of the other people, Studzinski and Myslevsky, among others, they basically sort of escape, and they try and sort of figure out what to do next. And in the last portion of the play, Myslevsky basically decides that he is going to join the Red Army, if they will have him. And he basically is like, yeah, the Bolsheviks clearly are right, the people are with them. That is, these are the people who have won the sort of battle for history, right? And so he says, essentially, I'm going to go join them, and if they do not want me, if they decide to execute me for being an aristocrat and a former member of the White Movement, then I will deserve that. But he says here, he and Studzinski have this big argument about this, because Studzinski, and to be clear, Myslevsky is not a communist, right? He has not seen the light of the communist cause and been converted to become a true believer. He is a sort of a pragmatist in this moment, right? The Bolsheviks are winning. They are going to take Ukraine. We, the White Movement, have failed to stop them, and this is how I am going to navigate this new world. Studzinski is very opposed to this. He wants to go and link up with other white forces that were still active by this point. This is 1919, I think. And Myslevsky is basically like, yeah, you can do what you want, man, but you're going to fail. And they have this big argument. And Studzinski says, we used to have Russia, a great power. And Myslevsky says, and we shall have again. Of course we shall. Studzinski says, of course, you'll have a long time to wait, though. Myslevsky says, it won't be the old one. It'll be new, a new Russia. And that's a really interesting bit, right? Because this is where it starts to get propagandistic, right at the end. So even though Myslevsky, again, this is this sort of interesting thing that Bulgakov is doing here, because in a way, the fact that Myslevsky is not a dedicated communist makes this more powerful, that he says, this will be a new Russia. Things will be better, right? Because that's the communist line, right? That is what the Bolsheviks promised. And to have that sort of claim of we're building a new Russia, things will be great, we have a bright future, coming from the mouth of a communist character, a Bolshevik character, you're like, yeah, okay, cool. That's the party line. But to have that coming from the mouth of a white character who has fought the Bolsheviks, that's much more powerful. So that's cool. The other thing that I had thought about mentioning this toward the beginning, but I didn't. There wasn't a sort of organic place to work it in. One thing that's cool about the Day of the Turbins, from a purely sort of theater history perspective, is the original performance run in 1925-26 was at the Moscow Art Theater, directed by Konstantin Stanislavski. And theater people will know Stanislavski's name because Stanislavski is one of the most influential directors and sort of theorists of performance in history, right? The Stanislavski system really became sort of foundational to how actors are trained in much of the Western world, even though there's some argument, and I don't know this because I don't read Russian and I'm not familiar enough with it, but there is some argument that, in fact, the version of the Stanislavski system that gets transmitted into Western languages, particularly English, is kind of a corruption of what Stanislavski himself actually taught in Russia. But nonetheless, this is a play that was originally directed by Stanislavski. So that's cool.